What kind of marks do you give the press, the media, television, magazines, newspapers, columnists, after, and you've been through this now for a couple of months?
It's a mixed bag. In the same Newsweek that you picked up, there is an article by Jeff Cowley about the current state of knowledge about IQ, which is, I think, wonderful. It's not so much about the books, it is sort of, I think, giving a very straightforward statement of what we know. There have been various articles that I felt the news articles have been much better than the op-ed pieces. The op-ed pieces, I think this book is a Rorschach test. That's my latest take on what's going on here. I'll give you an example. In this Newsweek article, one of the other articles in Newsweek besides Jeff Cowley's, this book is called an angry book. And it's talked about as this political polemic. It's not an angry book. And the proof of that, I would ask people, even who don't want to buy it, but when you're in the bookstore, pick it up, leaf through a few pages, and see the tone, and see if you can find anything in this book that's angry. The book is, in the op-ed pages, I think people are projecting onto the book a lot of their own deepest anxieties and fears, particularly involving race.
What's the magic chapter? The one that everybody reads, the one that everybody writes.
Chapter 13, Ethnic Differences in Cognitive Ability. The numbering was an accident.
Did you know that this would be the chapter that everybody would go to?
There is, in the first page of the chapter, there is a passage that says, in effect, this is the reason why IQ tests are so controversial, ethnic differences. The fact that many of you have turned first to this page indicates how sensitive the issue has become, because we knew that we would have lots of readers who would flip through until they found this chapter. We crafted that chapter. I say that proudly. Dick and I had a very definite intention where we say to the reader, look, we are now entering into an area which is the most inflammatory, explosive topic, probably in social science. What we are going to do is start at the beginning with the easiest questions, and we are going to progressively work our way into the harder questions, and we are going to tell you everything we know about this topic. For once in your life, you can be confident that the authors have not decided to censor themselves to protect you from information you shouldn't have. On the other hand, and this is what we wanted very badly to communicate, these two authors are approaching these data with maturity, with thoughtfulness. They know what they're doing technically, and you can have confidence in it. I think, self-serving statement, I think we succeeded.
You know, you can start at either end of this spectrum, but the various things that you bring up that are criticized are all the way at one end, that Jews are the smartest people in the world, or that Asians are the smartest people in the world. Rather than, and I'm looking at the page where you have a little box around it, and it says, are Jews really smarter than anyone else, question mark. Did you think that end of this discussion would be controversial?
I didn't think so, no. It turned out that I was the one who had to put that in, because I said to Dick at one point, gee, you know, we really ought to have a little discussion, because people are always asking about, are Jews really smarter than everybody else? So let's put a box in there. And Dick himself was Jewish. And he had avoided doing that because he didn't want to sound like he was tooting his own horn. But I thought this was a case of, it's a question that's on people's minds. Why not tell them?
Are Jews smarter than anyone else?
Yeah, as a group. This is something that I want everybody listening to be real sure about. We're talking about means. We're talking about distributions. So when I say Jews are smarter than anybody else, what I mean is that this center line going down through that bell curve is further over. It looks different for Jews than it does for non-Jews, and it's further over to the right. You've got huge overlap, so that you've got Jews who aren't very smart, and you've got Gentiles who are brilliant, and they overlap to a lot. Are the means different? Nobody's quite sure how different, but everybody agrees quite a bit. There's somewhere between 7 and 15 IQ points separating the means of Ashkenazi Jews and non-Jews.
How does that happen?
You can come up with all kinds of theories, but they're only theories. I mean, an obvious one is that over the centuries that Jews have been viciously persecuted. And out of this persecution, and I'm putting it very crudely here, but you had to be real smart to survive. But that's only a theory. Who knows?
Were they born that way?
Here again, you get into the question of, well, are they born that way? But also look at Jewish households and the way that education is emphasized so much, so that from the very beginning, everybody's expected to become highly educated. And trying to disentangle that gets very, very tough. And Dick Herrnstein and I certainly don't try to do it for Jews, and we also talk about how difficult it is to try to do it for anybody else.
What about Asians as a group?
Asians as a group, if you had to make if I were forced to make a guess, Dick and I said probably the overall IQ is maybe 3 points higher than Caucasians. There are people who say there's no difference still. There's a fellow named Harold Stevenson, who's a well-known scholar and very good, who says, no, if you match carefully enough on all kinds of social and demographic variables, you can reduce the difference to 0. He has some good data. Dick and I take a look at the whole body of data, and we say there's an awful lot which says that there's a higher mean. The big difference between Asians and non-Asians is fascinating, though. It's not just the mean, it's the profile. In an IQ test, you've got verbal IQ and performance IQ. Performance is also more accurately described as visual spatial. So if you've got very good visual spatial skills, you'd probably be a good engineer. You'd have a lot of aptitude for the sciences. You're able to manipulate in 3 dimensions in your mind. Verbal is what it sounds like. You know, English majors have high verbal skills. It turns out that East Asians have conspicuously elevated visual spatial skills compared to verbal, and when you compare them to Caucasians. And this is true in Japan, it's true in China, it's true in Singapore, it's true among Asians who moved to the United States, it's true among Korean babies adopted by Belgians at birth. So that's a very marked difference between Asians and non-Asians.
Black Americans.
The mean is about, by most tests, it's about 15 points below the white mean. And that has created the huge controversy about IQ tests that persists. Again, take a look at the overlap. I mean, you've got lots and lots of blacks and whites in the same range. You also have tens of thousands of blacks at the very highest levels of IQ. Which is another reason that insofar as we treat people as individuals in this society, the black-white difference should not cause a lot of anxiety.
As you know, there's been lots of stuff written. We talked about that earlier. I've got some things here. I want to read it back to you and just get your response to it. E.J. Dionne, Jr. in the Washington Post writes, the Herrnstein-Murray book is not a scientific book at all, but a political argument offered by skilled polemicists aimed at defeating egalitarians. Let me stop there.
That is an outrageous statement. Again, the defense is the book itself. The science in the bell curve is meticulous because we knew that it was going to be attacked, and believe me, we took great pains to be extremely careful about not going out on limbs. But more than that, the science in the bell curve is very much in the mainstream of psychometrics, which is to say, the kinds of things we say do not push the edge of what is known at any point. That kind of statement, and I'm sad to read it from E.J. Dionne because I like a lot of his other work, that is simply without foundation. It's wrong. It's untrue.
Back to Newsweek, Pat Wingert, writes, "This is frightening stuff." This is after he talks about a lot of what your premise is. "It is partly based on an Atlantic Monthly article by Herrnstein, who wrote in 1989, in which he argued that dumb people are outbreeding smart people. The scientific term for such a trend is
dysgenesis.
Dysgenesis," said Murray and Herrnstein. Take it very seriously. What's your reaction to this? Is frightening stuff? I mean, were you ever frightened about the material that you wrote about?
Frightened is not the right word. There were lots of things that we wrote about that we didn't have any good answers for. Let's take just Genesis as an example, because it illustrates several important points about the book. Dysgenesis refers to the fact that if you have people with low IQs having more babies, people with high IQs are having them at younger ages, you end up with a downward pressure on what you could call the human capital of the country. And this is the kind of argument that was made by eugenicists in the past and was used as the justification for all kinds of elaborate schemes to encourage smart women to have babies and discourage not so smart women from having babies. Dick and I say, okay, let's look at the data. This is chapter 15, if I remember correctly. We will look now at the data on dysgenesis. And what we say is, well, there is downward pressure. There's been an awful lot of scientific work done on this. That seems to be the fact of the matter. On the other hand, you have things pushing it in the other direction as well. Better nutrition helps. Better education helps. A variety of other things. We say, so the net result is, it's not that we're going to be a nation of dummies in another 3 generations or anything like that, but it is downward pressure. This is a kind of scientific finding, and it's good science, which people ought to be aware of. That does not mean that you must therefore start advocating eugenic schemes. A great deal of the material in this book is not only not driven by policy considerations, a lot of it is the kind of thing where we say, look, in a world of reasoned discourse and attempts to understand what's going on, this material should be out in the open. And that's all we say.
What was your reaction to all the fuss over this in the New Republic?
Well, the New Republic piece, for those who haven't seen it, is a long, very long excerpt from the book, plus some new material that Dick and I prepared about race. And what was it, 13, 15, something, 19? A whole bunch of commentaries. First reaction is that Andrew Sullivan, who's the editor, and Mari Peretz, who is the publisher, are brave men. They were under enormous pressure not to do this. Second reaction is that the pieces preceding ours, all of these reactions, are mostly hysterical. There is lots of name-calling, lots of slipshod statements, lots of, well, I felt that we actually probably came out pretty good in the New Republic, because if people read the reactions with all of their characterizations of us and then came to our article, which I think is rather calm and reasoned, that's to our advantage.
Mickey Kaus, in that, writing in the TRB column in that issue, which is dated October the 31st, wrote this: "The dishonest book he has co-authored and the even more disingenuous article this magazine has now published reveal that he is not." And earlier they said Murray is a reliable guide when it comes to exploring this possibility. I'm mixing all this up.
Yeah,
I wanted to basically pass on to you and get your response to Mickey Kaus calling this a dishonest book.
Brian, I am... You know, you can only go so far in saying to people, go out and read the book, because you know that a lot of people simply aren't going to do it.
Although, the last time I checked, and it was, when this runs, it'll be a couple weeks later, that it was like 4 on the bestseller list of the Publishers
It's selling a
Weekly.
lot of copies. However, I'm trying to think, what do you say to a viewer who is not going to read the book, and they hear that kind of allegation? Not only, as long as we're talking, this is an allegation by a man who knows me.
How well?
Not a social friend, but we certainly encountered each other a lot, discussed each other a lot. He's read my work in the past. Knowing that it is not a dishonest book, knowing that indeed Dick Herrnstein and I went to enormous pains to make it as transparently honest as we could, I asked myself, what is Mickey Kaus thinking when he writes those sentences? Does he really believe them? And here is it's an interesting experience to be an author of this kind of book, because I've not been in this situation before. A lot of your assumptions about human relationships are thrown off track by reactions like that. You don't really want to believe that Mickey Kaus wrote those sentences, say, I know I'm lying, but I'm doing the Lord's work. You also don't want to think that Mickey Kaus read the book and actually somehow came away with that impression. So you ask my reaction is, I'm befuddled by it. I don't know what to make of it.
Here's another quote from another article. I think this was in the Washington Times, and it's from a Roman Catholic priest by the name of Richard John Newhouse, editor of the religion journal First Things. Do you know him?
Yeah.
He says, are we supposed to sit around and mourn the fact that blacks aren't as smart as whites and there's nothing we can do about it, Father Newhouse asked. That's a dumb question and an inflammatory question, and there are very good reasons for not having it.
And it bears no relation to anything we said in the book. Look, not only do we not say that we'll have to sit around and mourn this, we go to great lengths. Notice we're talking about race more than we probably should relative to what's in the book. But we say very explicitly, you can face all the facts on ethnic differences in IQ and not run screaming from the room. That's a direct quote from the book. What we mean by that is that a lot of the people's fears out there about what all this means are simply not true. Don't know where else to take the statement with that.